By hour 4, your ankles are swelling. By hour 6, your sinuses are stinging from air drier than the Sahara. By hour 10, your circulatory system has been fighting a battle that your body at 70 manages differently than it did at 40. And the quiet, cumulative damage of a long-haul economy flight on a senior traveler's body is something that almost no airline safety briefing, almost no travel guide, and almost no boarding pass will ever mention. Because here at Airport Wisdom, we talk about what the industry does not. And today that means walking through all 10 of the mistakes that are determining whether senior travelers over 70 walk off a long-haul flight or get wheeled off one. And the one at the top of this list is the mistake that almost nobody realizes they are making until they are already dealing with the consequences at altitude. So stay with us through every single one of these because the information builds and the stakes are real. Mistake number 10 is boarding cold. And for travelers over 70, the flight genuinely starts before you sit down on the aircraft, because by the time you reach your seat, your body has already been stationary for 3 hours, moving through the sequence of car, terminal, security line, and gate seating that folds you into chairs without any meaningful movement in between, and joints that do not warm up the way they did at 50, combined with hydration that is already declining from the dry terminal air, and a nervous system carrying the background hum of pre-flight tension, produce a body that arrives at the aircraft door in a significantly more compromised physical state than the boarding pass suggests. The defense is specific and it costs nothing. Arrive 30 minutes earlier than your anxiety says you need to. Use that time to walk slow, deliberate laps around the gate area rather than sitting. Sip water steadily in the hours before boarding, rather than gulping it at the gate. Use the bathroom immediately before boarding so you are starting the flight from a neutral baseline. And take 3 slow, controlled breaths before you sit down. Board warm, not stiff, because whether your first hour in that seat feels manageable or immediately difficult is determined by what you did in the hour before you boarded. Mistake number 9 is skipping compression socks, and the travelers who dismiss them as unnecessary or embarrassing almost universally learn the hard way what happens to venous return in a pressurized cabin over 8, 10, or 14 hours. The valves that push blood back up your legs from your feet work against gravity during normal daily activity, and when you sit completely still in a reclined cabin seat for extended hours, blood pools progressively in your lower extremities, producing the swelling that by hour 8 can make it impossible to put shoes back on, and in its more serious manifestations contributing to the conditions that make deep vein thrombosis a genuine medical risk for older travelers on long flights. Compression socks in the 15 to 20 millimeters of mercury range, not medical grade but travel specific, provide the external pressure that compensates for what the venous valves are no longer doing efficiently at 70, and the one preparation that makes them effective rather than merely decorative is putting them on at home before you reach the airport, not on the plane after 2 hours of already sitting, because the purpose is to prevent pooling from beginning, not to address it after it is established. Mistake number 8 is sitting frozen past the 2-hour mark, and the physiology that makes this dangerous for senior travelers is specific. The calf muscle functions as a secondary circulatory pump, contracting and releasing during normal movement to squeeze blood back up through the venous system toward the heart. And when a traveler remains completely immobile in a window or middle seat for 4, 5, or 6 uninterrupted hours, that pumping action stops entirely. Blood pools in the lower legs, and the conditions for clot formation develop in a way that compression socks alone cannot fully counteract without movement. The defense layers 3 specific actions. Ankle pumps every 30 minutes. Toes up, toes down, slow and deliberate for 60 seconds, regardless of whether the seatbelt sign is illuminated, because seated ankle movement does not require standing. A walk to the lavatory and back every 2 hours regardless of whether you need to use it, because the goal is calf activation, not bathroom access. And if the aisle is genuinely blocked by a sleeping neighbor or a service cart, pressing your feet hard into the floor for 10 full seconds, releasing completely, and repeating 5 times, which activates the same muscle group through isometric contraction. Move before stiffness moves you, because the joint and circulatory consequences of extended immobility compound with each passing hour in a way that makes recovery progressively harder as the flight continues. Mistake number 7 is waiting until you feel thirsty to drink water. And for travelers over 70, this is the most physiologically deceptive mistake on this entire list, because the thirst signal that tells your brain your body needs water weakens significantly with age, meaning that the absence of thirst in a cabin environment where humidity sits below 20% is not evidence of adequate hydration, but is instead evidence that the signal system responsible for communicating that need has become less reliable. And by the time thirst actually registers in that environment, you are already meaningfully behind on hydration in a way that affects circulation, cognitive clarity, mucous membrane integrity, and medication efficacy. The defense is scheduled rather than responsive. Bring an empty bottle through security, fill it immediately before boarding, set a quiet repeating alarm every 45 minutes, and take 3 full swallows, not polite sips, actual swallows, every time it sounds, because maintaining hydration throughout the flight rather than chasing it from behind is the difference between landing alert and landing with the dull headache and cognitive fog that dehydration at altitude produces. Mistake number 6 is eating a heavy or high-sodium meal during the flight, and the combination of airline food chemistry and pressurized cabin physiology makes this particularly consequential for senior travelers. Airlines formulate their meals with significantly higher sodium content than equivalent meals at ground level because pressurization and altitude suppress taste perception in a way that requires more salt and sugar to produce the same flavor response, which means that a meal that tastes adequate at 35,000 feet would taste aggressively salty at sea level. And kidneys that are already processing more slowly at 70 than they did at 50 cannot clear that sodium load efficiently, producing the fluid retention that compounds the swelling that compression socks and movement are working to prevent. Add alcohol, which is a diuretic that accelerates the dehydration the cabin environment is already causing, and you have stacked 3 mechanisms working against your circulatory system simultaneously. The defense is eating a real meal at home before you leave, choosing the simpler of the 2 meal options on board, skipping the second roll and the second pour, and packing 2 small items you actually want, a banana, a handful of unsalted nuts, a soft granola bar, because food you brought from home has none of the sodium engineering that airline catering requires. Mistake number 5 is underestimating what cabin noise does to an older body across 8, 10, or 12 hours, and the mechanism is one that most travelers do not consciously register because the sound itself is not dramatic. The steady 75 to 85 decibel hum of jet engines at cruising altitude sits somewhere between a vacuum cleaner and a busy restaurant, and the auditory system processes that sustained ambient noise as a low-level environmental stressor that progressively elevates cortisol levels in a way that is invisible in the first hour and cumulative over the entire flight, producing a fatigue on landing that is separate from the physical fatigue of immobility, and that experienced travelers often describe as arriving already worn down before the trip has begun. The layered defense is foam earplugs as the base, soft, inexpensive, and sufficient to take the edge off the engine drone, with noise-canceling headphones over the top for passengers who can wear them comfortably for extended periods, and a calm playlist downloaded to your device at home, rather than dependent on in-flight Wi-Fi, because the investment of reducing auditory stress throughout a long flight pays dividends in how you feel when you walk off the aircraft at the destination. Mistake number 4 is storing medications, reading glasses, hearing aid batteries, and any other essential personal items in the overhead bin rather than in the personal item under the seat in front of you. And the scenario that makes this dangerous rather than merely inconvenient is the turbulence event that keeps the seatbelt sign illuminated for 40 minutes at exactly the window when a medication dose is due, leaving the traveler unable to access what they need, with the crew legally unable to assist due to federal safety protocol, and a missed dose window that for medications managing blood pressure, cardiac function, blood sugar, or any number of other conditions that become more common and more precisely managed after 70 is not simply a scheduling inconvenience. Everything that you might need during the flight, every pill bottle, backup glasses, hearing aid batteries and spare case, lip balm, phone charger, travel snacks, belongs in the personal item under the seat before the door closes, reachable by bending forward rather than requiring you to stand, raise your arms, and wait for turbulence to clear. Mistake number 3 is ignoring cabin dryness, and the health consequence that most senior travelers do not anticipate is landing with a compromised immune defense rather than simply landing with dry skin. The mucous membranes of the nasal passages and throat are the first line of defense against airborne pathogens, trapping bacteria and viruses before they can establish respiratory infection, and those membranes require moisture to function. But in a cabin environment sitting below 20% humidity, which is drier than most desert climates, they thin progressively across a long flight, and by hour 10, a senior traveler's respiratory immune defense on landing is measurably weaker than it was at takeoff, with 3 weeks of international vacation ahead. The underseat kit defense includes lip balm applied every 2 hours, a travel-size nasal saline spray used once per nostril every few hours to maintain membrane moisture, a small pot of hand cream, and face wipes for freshening up before landing. Because stepping off a long-haul flight looking and feeling like you managed the journey rather than survived it starts with the 30 seconds of attention every 2 hours that most passengers skip. Mistake number 2 is ignoring the destination clock from the moment of boarding, and for travelers over 70 whose circadian rhythm shifts more slowly than it did at 40, the jet lag that results from fighting the transition rather than beginning it at takeoff can consume days of a trip that was months in the planning. The technique that experienced long-haul travelers have refined across decades is simple and costs nothing. The moment you buckle your seatbelt, change every clock and watch you are carrying to destination time. And from that moment, make every decision. When to eat, when to sleep, when to walk the cabin, based on what time it is at the destination rather than what your body is telling you based on where you departed. Skip the meal if it is the middle of the night at your destination. Sleep even if it is broken and feels premature. Use window light exposure strategically by opening the shade when destination morning has begun. The circadian system that manages sleep, hunger, and alertness at 70 needs more runway to complete its adjustment than it did at 40, and every hour of intentional alignment during the flight reduces the number of vacation days that adjustment process consumes on the ground. Mistake number 1 is the one that the airline will never announce, that the gate agent will never mention, and that the safety briefing was not designed to address. And it is the mistake that for some senior travelers on long-haul flights becomes a medical emergency rather than a recoverable inconvenience. Inadequate deep vein thrombosis defense. Sitting still in a pressurized cabin for more than 4 hours elevates DVT risk for any adult, and after 70 that risk is substantially higher than it was at 40 and rises in direct proportion to flight duration because the combination of venous wall changes that accompany aging, the circulatory slowing that extended immobility produces, and the dehydration that cabin environment accelerates creates the conditions in which blood clots form in the deep veins of the leg, and in the cases that escalate, travel from the leg to the lung with consequences that no destination experience can compensate for. The defense is layered and non-negotiable. Compression socks on before you leave home. Hydration every 45 minutes with real swallows, not sips. Ankle pumps every 30 minutes throughout the flight. A cabin walk every 2 hours without exception. And one specific conversation with your physician before any flight exceeding 6 hours. Not a request for generic travel advice, but a direct question about whether a low-dose aspirin before departure is appropriate for your specific cardiovascular history. Move every 30 minutes. Your veins are counting. Because a long-haul economy flight after 70 is not about making the experience perfect, it is about making certain that your body lands in the same condition as your suitcase, ready to begin the trip rather than needing to recover from the journey that got you there. Tell us in the comments which of these 10 mistakes you have experienced on a long-haul flight, or share what has made the biggest difference in how you feel when you land, because that first-hand knowledge from the senior travelers in our Airport Wisdom community is more valuable than anything we can produce on our own. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because Airport Wisdom publishes new insider travel guidance for senior passengers every single week. And we will see you in the next video, because the flight is not the destination, and your body deserves to arrive ready for what comes after it.